Alright guys, so today we're going to be looking at Mafia Remastered, Definitive Edition, whatever you want to call this. And so I figured there's no better way to start out a Definitive Edition remaster type game with probably the most two important sections, right? So first we're going to start with bugs. Now, if you notice, there's no audio for the cutscene that there's playing in the background. That's not an editing choice or anything like that. The cutscene just does not have audio. And Mafia 2 had a very similar problem to this, the remaster definitive edition, and that characters' lips just didn't move for some cutscenes. Main characters, just like in here, there's just no audio. Now, luckily, I have subtitles and I can read what's happening, so that's nice, but let's move on to a bug that's just a little bit worse. So believe it or not, there is a cutscene here, and something happens with a train. I have no idea what, because it's just black. There's audio this time, and I can read again, subtitles, that's good, but I can't see what's happening. I ended up having to just skip it entirely, and I kind of just missed out on how we got to where we end up, or anything like that. And let's just get this out of the way now. We'll try to stay away from spoilers, but towards the end when we talk about the story, there will be spoilers. So these are probably the two major bugs that I had. Right, these happened only a couple of times. There were a couple other minor ones that you have in a lot of games, but I just wanted to point these two out first because they had a similar problem in Mafia 2. But some of the smaller ones include things like frame rate drops when there's big set pieces like you see here. I had a couple of flying cars around the map, but I didn't bother to capture it because I didn't have that problem often enough to where it really bothered me. It was just a couple of times. Again, this would be a more concerning bug if it happened more, but my game only crashed once, and it didn't really seem like a high demand mission or anything crazy was going on. I was just driving down the road, so I'm just gonna assume that's a one-time fluke. I didn't have a problem with it again for the rest of the game. But let's move on from bugs to probably the other most important thing in a remaster, and that's graphics. So we have a cutscene here from a decent ways into the game. Most of this is before the halfway point, and you can see for the most part everything looks good. The guns, the lighting, the facial animations, the characters, even the enemies to an extent, the more general ones that are seen throughout the game look really good. But to kind of sum up the graphics in this game, I found a perfect example in one of the levels. So throughout this cutscene, I'm spinning the camera around. Look at the house, especially the windows, the walls, the floorboards, how they're kind of just these rough, plain textures, right? There's not really any detail to them. It doesn't feel like you could reach out and touch them, right? Especially the windows and the door. But then when I turn around, look at this puddle behind me. Look how good this puddle looks, right? And you'll see here in a second. And this is the main saving grace for this game. The puddles in this game, and just night in general, looks incredible in this game. It looks so good. Look at that puddle, right? And the cars look good. They just, nothing compares to these puddles in this game, alright? The fire is okay. Some of the effects, just, I cannot get over how good the puddles look, right? Everything else, it holds up. It's alright. There's off textures here and there like that house that you saw, but overall everything holds up to what I would say are standards for modern games, except for these puddles that are just completely next gen. They look absolutely insane. This game might as well have been called Puddle Simulator. So as we move over into the gameplay, I figured I would combine the driving along with the actual character movement, and so neither of these are great, right? The animations for running, it grows on you over time. At the beginning, the running just looks really stiff. All of the parkour animations, if that's what you want to call it, the climbing, the falling, the jumping, I never got over how stiff and weak those animations look, and they're tolerable. They're not terrible, but they're just not as fluid as I would like them to be. Now, that's that, but let's talk about the driving. Oh boy, and I understand, right? Some people are going to really like the driving, right? It's meant to simulate, you know, the weight and heaviness and just overall advancements we've made right over those 100 years, but these cars are terrible to drive, especially in the beginning. Once you get past the little hump in the beginning where they start to give you faster and more agile cars, it gets a little bit better, but in the beginning when you're driving slow, just, you know, all these weight-bearing cars, you really are going to hate the driving, and a large part of the game is driving. Whether that's doing a mission that involves driving, like a race, or a chase scene, or driving to a mission, driving from a mission, a large chunk of this game is driving, and they acknowledge that there's arcade and simulator settings for the driving, and so even further though than that, they have this skip drive option, right? So when you're driving from mission to mission, every single mission essentially starts out, you have to drive where you're going. There's a few where it just puts you at the location, but for a majority of them, you have to drive to where you're going. And this, I guess, is the time to say that this is a very linear game. It's not like Mafia 2 or 3 where you have an open world to explore, and even in Mafia 2 where it was limited, you could still explore a bit. In this, it's very mission, watch a cutscene, drive to your mission, watch a cutscene, drive to your, and just that, pure missions, right? And so you get a lot of driving with that, and they have this skip drive option, and so this allows you to skip the drive to the mission, right? And this, I was doing some basic math with the playtime and all of that, and essentially if you assume each drive's 2 minutes, you know, that's being generous, it's probably longer than that. There's about 20 missions, so it's, if you skip a drive, that takes about, we'll say 40 minutes to an hour off the game, right? And it's not that long of a game purely because, like I said, it's just pure story content. There's no side content or exploring or any of that. It's just story the whole way through. And so, like I said, if you do skip those drives, it probably takes about an hour or more off the game, which would bring it down from the 7.5 hours I beat it in, but it's saying 8 to 12 hours, probably down to 6-ish hours if you skip all those drivings, and you know, that all depends on the difficulty and all of that. And I guess the final thing I'll leave it with driving is, if it bothers you as much as it was really bothering me, driving in kind of the first person, I guess if that's what you want to call it, hood cam, really helps make the driving significantly easier. It's not going to look as cinematic, you're not going to get nice shots if you're drifting around corners, and the chases aren't going to be as cool, but it'll definitely help you with some of those missions that you're just crashing and failing because it has time restraints, and just overall driving better, not having to deal with smashing into things. So before we finally talk about the story, let's talk about the gun and I guess vehicle combat, if you want to include that in here too. And so it's not terrible, but it's definitely just like the movement and driving. It's really stiff. You can tell it's old, right? Especially the melee combat is awful, right? I didn't even bother with the melee combat after they taught you how to do it. I just shot everybody. It's just unresponsive and has weird timing to it. It doesn't feel good. The animations for melee combat aren't great. But before we go more into shooting, I want to talk about the vehicle combat real quick, since we just came off that. I can't decide if I hated this or was okay with it, right? They needed a way to keep the car chases more interesting, and car chases were a problem I had with the game, but they needed a way to keep them interesting so that you're not just driving these slow and sluggish cars trying to keep up with people, and so they decided to add this mechanic of shooting at the enemies, but it's auto-aimed, so you're kind of just spamming a button, but then at other times you have unlimited ammo, like here, and sometimes you have limited ammo, so you can't shoot at all, and the times they limit your ammo seems like the times you actually need it, and so these just seemed really weird to me. You know, I think they could have maybe done this better with kind of a crackdown style of targeting the different parts of the vehicle to do different types of damage. I think that could have gone really well, but that's just my opinion on that. Let's move to the actual gun combat, which doesn't actually start until a good chunk into the first act of the game. And so even between the two settings, I just change it here. It's very just off. I don't know how to describe it other than just feeling completely heavy, I guess is the word to use it. They wanted to make the guns feel heavy, like they have weight to them, but they weren't able to do that without making the aiming impossible. Without auto aim on, your sensitivity is either so slow that you cannot turn quick enough to kill somebody, or so fast that it looks like you're playing Call of Duty. And with the aim assist on, you're just playing GTA, essentially just snapping to everybody. Now, as far as set pieces go with gunfights, there were very few big action set pieces in the game. I would say maybe 4 total, and they start you out with this one in the very first act of the game, the very beginning, and they kind of lead you to believe that the whole game is going to have this level of action and choreographed gunfights, and they are there. There's a couple. I won't say any of them because they're all in the later half of the game, but I would say there's 3 or 4 that really stand out, but the rest are kind of low scale and don't have this kind of planned map destruction that they show off here. So for the final part of this video, we're going to quickly go over the story because, again, this game is 18 years old at this point, so I don't want to spend too much time on it. But if you're like me and were not even able to comprehend a game at that age, and this is your first time playing it, then let's just go through really quickly. So like I said earlier, it's kind of short, around 7.5 hours, but it's all story. You go from mission to mission, kind of like I touched on in the combat. It's kind of scaled down the story from Mafia 2 and 3. It's not as extreme, where Mafia 2 is, I would say, standard Mafia stuff that you would expect, kind of those huge, backstabbing, over-the-top Mafia movies, and Mafia 3 is just a revenge plot. This kind of takes a back seat and is a more simmered down story. Now, obviously, don't get me wrong, I'm running on a rooftop shooting at cops here, so it does have those over-the-top moments, but it's not as grand scale as some of the other Mafia games, and I think that's a good thing. So, overall, the story feels good, except for the first act, in my opinion. It tries to do that showing you the ropes thing, but it just expands it for way too long. It kind of waits a long time to pick up in the beginning and drags out a little bit at the end. Now, this is your spoiler warning. We're going to talk spoilers very briefly, so if you haven't played it, if you haven't finished it, go do that and then come back. Alright, so the game is told in a flashback perspective, and I don't have a problem with this. It's not done terribly. There are ways to do it better, and there are definitely ways to do it worse. I think telling a flashback from a main character's perspective doesn't work a lot of the time because you know that nothing's going to happen to that character, and the story largely focuses on you as the player building a relationship with Polly and Sam, and that's kind of the emotional arc, along with some of the other characters that end up getting arrested in the end, but it's mainly revolved around Polly and Sam. If you, as the player, do not buy their relationship with Tommy, then really this game isn't going to do much in the ending, right? And they try to do this thing with Tommy where he feels bad for what he does, but he does it anyways, and then he doesn't feel bad, and he goes back and forth, and I think they could have done it a little bit better. It's like they wanted him to be the sympathetic guy, but they also wanted him to be like a hard Mafia guy, and they couldn't really decide where to go with it, so they just threw both in there. But overall, I liked those aspects of it, and I would have liked it a little bit less if they didn't end it the way they did. I think the ending, and you know what I'm talking about, is a perfect way to end it. That is the only way I think you can do flashback type stories, is to have some kind of gameplay that goes further than the initial telling of the story. And I wasn't going to show it or talk about it anyways, but we're doing it. This is a great tie-in to Mafia 2, even though some of the characters might not look great, but it is a great way to lead into the next game and kind of tie everything together and just finish off Tommy's story. But that's my opinion. If I had to rate the games, I would say Mafia 2 is my least favorite. Not that I don't like any of these games. I like all of them. But Mafia 2 is my least favorite, and then Mafia 1, and then I really like Mafia 3. I know it's a minority opinion, but I really like the way it's told. Maybe that'll be an unpopular opinion one of these days. But that's my review on Mafia Definitive Edition. If I had to give this a score, it'd probably sit at around a 7 or an 8. I'd say 7 right now, just based off of some of the driving that was annoying me. If you skipped all of that, it's definitely a more enjoyable experience. But you guys let me know what you thought of the game down below, and I'll see you guys on the next one.